Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 14th of July of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, because while Zelensky is in France, the Russians continue attacking the territory of Ukraine with drones and missiles. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians have carried out at least 3 waves of attacks on the city of Odesa. There was one overnight attack and there were 2 daily attacks. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation this morning published the first report about the situation in this area. This morning, somewhere around at 10 a.m. of the local time, the Russians stated that they damaged the Odesa region, and there was the Yuzhny port infrastructure facilities used for unloading fuel and lubricants, and 7 fuel and lubricant storage tanks intended for the Ukrainian armed forces. These are the facilities that were attacked by Russians. Additionally, a bulk carrier delivering military cargo was damaged during unloading at the Yuzhny port's container terminal. A tanker was also damaged while en route from the port of Chornomorsk to the port of Odesa. So these are the consequences, and these are the results of the overnight attack between the 13th and the 14th of July of 2026. Several hours later, more precisely somewhere around at 3 p.m., the Russians published another report. Through the day, the Russian armed forces continued to strike Ukrainian ports and vessels deployed to the Ukrainian armed forces. 2 dry cargo ships were hit by attack drones en route from the port of Chornomorsk in the Odesa region to the port of Odesa. At the port of Yuzhny, high-precision air-launched weapons struck infrastructure facilities of the logistics center of the transport company Miktrans, 12 trucks and a fuel tanker transporting military cargo and fuel for the Ukrainian armed forces. As you can see, as for the daily attack, the Russians attacked not just ships in the area of the Black Sea, but also the Russians attacked the company Miktrans, and as you can see, at least 12 trucks were destroyed by Russians. Most likely the Russians managed to find out that the Ukrainians were using those trucks as drone carriers. And this evening, around at 7 p.m., the Russians published another report, and the third report of the previous 24 hours, and the Russians attacked that they once again attacked the Odesa region. 3 more cargo ships were hit by attack drones in the port of Odesa. Port infrastructure facilities were damaged, and 5 fuel and lubricant storage tanks were destroyed. And of course, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos from the area of the city of Odesa. In this video, we can see a cargo vessel near Odesa that was struck by Russians, and as you can see, this vessel was damaged significantly. Here we have more vessels in the area of the city of Odesa badly damaged by Russians as a result of the 24 hours attack that started yesterday in the evening and probably still hasn't ended. So here we have another cargo another vessel somewhere in the area of Odesa that was attacked by Russians. The Russians published just 3 videos, more precisely pro-Ukrainian sources published just 3 videos, but as you can see, according to these reports that were published by Russians, up to 10 ships were attacked by Russians, and the Russians haven't stopped. We have a 4th video from this area, so at least we have 4 videos where we can see 4 ships attacked and damaged and probably even destroyed in the area of the city of Odesa. Furthermore, the Russians attacked several fuel tanks. So we have videos from this territory here. For example, in these videos, we can see black smoke over this port infrastructure right after the Russians attacked this territory. Here we have fuel tanks, and here we have other facilities that were destroyed by Russians during the daily and overnight attacks. So as you can see, the Russians managed to deal significant damage to the Odesa region, and most likely the Russians are not planning to stop. And the most important thing that these are something like retaliatory strikes. I would like to remind you that since the beginning of the 6th of July of 2026, the Ukrainians have carried out hundreds of attacks in the area of the Sea of Azov, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians damaged dozens of vessels in the area of the Sea of Azov, dealing significant damage to the Russian logistics and the Russian infrastructure. And when the Ukrainians damaged so many vessels in this area, the Russians decided to mirror these actions and to attack the area of the city of Odesa. Most likely, once again, the Russians are not planning to stop, and most likely between the 14th and the 15th of July of 2026, the Russians will continue. And the most important, and most likely, the Russians are not planning to stop. Another important thing is that during the previous 24 hours, the city of Odesa wasn't the only city that was attacked by Russians. The Russians once again attacked the capital of Ukraine, the city of Kyiv, and this report was published this morning by the Minister of Defense. And according to this report, the Russians used 145 air vehicles to attack the territory of Ukraine using drones, and as we discussed, the Russians were also using missiles. The Russians were using Ha-59-69 missile, and the Russians were using Iskander modernized missile. This missile is very fast, much faster than previous generations of Iskander missiles. The Russians, according to information we have, attacked several enterprises on the territory of Ukraine, and this enterprise is one of the enterprises that was attacked by Russians. As for this satellite picture, we can see lots of trucks, we can see a parking site with a significant number of vehicles, different barracks, different hangars. The Russians most likely attacked these territory, and most likely when attacking, the Russians believed that the Ukrainians were using these facilities for upgrade purposes. They were upgrading probably trucks that later the Ukrainians were using to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. And this video was also published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see the overnight battle between the Russians and the Ukrainian air defense forces. Once again, the Russians used 5 modified S-400 ballistic missiles. Several sources stated that the Ukrainians managed to bring down up to 4 missiles of this type. And while Zelensky is on the territory of France, he has lots of meetings, talks with European representatives. Today we received a report that Ukraine will receive French Rafale fighters. Furthermore, today we received a report that the members of the coalition will conduct exercises in countries neighboring Ukraine. So according to information we have, these exercises, these drills are going to take place first on the territory of Poland, but most likely then on the territory of Moldova. Furthermore, France promised Ukraine to provide additional licenses for different military equipment. So we received lots of very important statements, lots of very important military packages were additionally announced, and all these things are done just with one purpose: to keep Zelensky on the territory of Europe for as long as possible, because the Russians still haven't carried out their mega strike or massive attack that is planned, and currently nobody knows for sure when exactly the Russians are planning to attack the territory of Ukraine. But several sources reported that this might happen during this upcoming night. Russia has already deployed over 2,000 drones to launch positions and is preparing for a massive attack, including on Kyiv and Odesa, according to monitors. Meanwhile, the martial law and the mobilization were extended once again officially. If you remember, just yesterday we discussed that the president of Ukraine just handed over this law to the Verkhovna Rada, and now we see that the Parliament of Ukraine has already adopted this law, which means that the mobilization and martial law were extended until the 31st of October of 2026, which means that 90 days more the conflict on the territory of Ukraine will continue. Now let's move further and let's discuss the Ukrainian overnight attack. The Ukrainians were attacking the city of Salavat, and the sources reported that the Ukrainians attacked the Salavat oil refinery. We have several videos published from this area, but telling the truth, just probably 10 videos were published during the previous night, which means that the Russians managed to mainly repel this attack, and the Ukrainians haven't managed to deal the damage they expected. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates. And first, let's talk about the northern directions. The Russians continue their offensive operation through the northeastern parts of the Sumy region, and these are the changes on the ground. So this is the end, for example, of the 12th of July of 2026. This is the end of the 13th, and this is the end of the 14th of July. As you can see, according to these changes, the Russians began attacking this pocket around the villages of Karino. Most likely the Russians would try to take under complete control these territories within the next 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe within a month. Furthermore, the Russians began offensive operation in the area of the village of Tolstodubovo, and as of the end of the 14th of July, up to 50% of the village is already under complete Russian control. The Russians are approaching towards the settlement of Ulanovo, and the Russians are shortening the distance towards the settlement of Karino. While the Russians are fighting here, the Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation and to prepare additional defense positions around the city of Glukhov. The battle for the city of Glukhov probably will take during the autumn military campaign. Now let's talk about the Sumy direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were also recorded through this territory. This is the end of the 13th of July, and this is the end of the 14th of July. According to neutral mappers, the Russians, as a result of the offensive operation of the Sumy offensive operation, managed to recapture the settlement of Kondrativka, and furthermore, the Russians began advancing further in the western direction, and the Russians are about to enter this big forest. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions to the north of the settlement of Khotin. We have reduced the infiltration area in this area and added additional gray zone. The Russians continue outflanking the settlement of Khotin, trying to attack the settlement from the northwest. Furthermore, the Russians continue expanding their positions to the south of the settlement of Volzhansk, trying to outflank Ukraine's positions in the area of the city of Khotin and Pisarevka from behind. If the Russians continue advancing to the south of the settlement of Volzhansk, and if Russians are able to take under complete control these territories, this part of this big forest, Sumy forest, then the Russians from these positions would be semi-encircle the settlement of Pisarevka and to cut main supply lines. Furthermore, the Russians accelerate their offensive operation between the villages of Krapivshina, Marina, Novosich, and Kiyanitsa. It seems that the next time when the Russians will publish about the situation in this area, they will report, or they would report, about control over several villages, but not just over 1 or 2, because it seems that if the defense of any of these villages collapses, then most likely the entire front line will collapse, and the Russians will be able to improve their position significantly to shorten the distances towards the city of Sumy and to force the Ukrainians to announce the evacuation. Furthermore, the Russians accelerate their attacks in the area of the settlement of Krasnopolye. In this video, we can see the Russians bombing the city with bombs, with FABs. As a result of attack, almost the entire building was wiped out by Russians. Moving further, the city of Kharkiv and the Kharkiv direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional gas stations were destroyed by Russians to the west of the city. The Russians continue neutralizing the city of Kharkiv. Furthermore, lots of drone strikes were recorded during the previous nights. We have a lot of videos on this matter. And according to information we have, the Russians once again improved their positions through the Bilyi Kilodiaz direction, and these are the changes on the ground. The Russians continue advancing, and here we can see almost similar situation, the same situation as we can see through the northern parts of the city of Sumy. And it seems that if the settlement of Bilyi Kilodiaz falls, then the Russians within weeks would be able to improve their positions significantly through the entire northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. As for the Lyman direction, during the previous 12 hours, we haven't received anything special. We stopped receiving updates neither from pro-Ukrainian nor from pro-Russian sources, as if nothing happens. I would like to remind you that 3 weeks ago, the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation reported that the Russians were about to establish complete control over the settlement of Lyman. 3 weeks ago, Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, stated that just 149 out of 11,000 buildings left. 3 weeks have passed, and we see that the Russians still haven't managed to finish the battle for the city, which means that something is happening. And according to different sources, right now the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack the Russians. The Ukrainians counterattack Russians to the north of the city of Lyman, trying to reduce the pressure of Russian troops in this area and to force the Russians to fall back. Right now, there are very heavy clashes, but we see that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians publish any update on this matter. As for the Eastern Slavyansk direction, as you can see, these days, once again, we received hundreds of videos and hundreds of episodes through this territory. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians conduct reconnaissance operations over the city of Nikolaevka. The Russians are trying to understand the current situation. The Ukrainians are trying to destroy these reconnaissance aircrafts. Meanwhile, the Russians continue pushing, and today, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians have improved their position significantly through this big forest, and the Russians managed to shorten the distances from their edge positions to the first buildings of the settlement of Nikolaevka to less than 2.4 kilometers. The battle for the city of Nikolaevka is going to start very soon. Meanwhile, local sources stated that according to different analysis, at least 80% of buildings in the city have been damaged or destroyed. So the Russians have already prepared the foothold for a battle. We see that the Ukrainians have lost positions, strong positions on the ground. As for the city of Konstantinovka, we haven't received anything special. Pro-Ukrainian sources continue reporting that the Russians are bringing more and more forces in the direction of the city of Konstantinovka, and the Russians continue preparing themselves before the beginning of the major offensive operation further in the direction of Druzhkovka. The Russians most likely don't have dozens of months or years for this operation. The operational pause started several weeks ago when the Russians finished the battle for Konstantinovka, and I think that the Russians are about to finish regrouping, and soon they will start their major offensive operation towards the city of Druzhkovka with the purpose to take the settlement under complete control and to answer the city of Kramatorsk from the south. As for the Zaporizhzhia direction, during the previous 12 hours, we continued receiving updates from the Zaporizhzhia area. Today, probably every single pro-Ukrainian source reported that Ukrainians managed to recapture dozens of villages through the Zaporizhzhia direction, but without proofs, without publishing videos confirming this. So let's wait and see what is going to happen next. As of now, we're not going to change the map until we get more reliable proofs about the situation. As for the city of Orikhiv, the Russians continue attacking the central part of the settlement with artillery and with aviation, trying to soften Ukraine's defense and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from these territories. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds us we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.